Dear Senators,
Hi there.
Hello.
My name is Caroline.
My name is Danielle Getzi.
My name is Kurt Petrovich.
My name is Jennifer Alchawi, and I was silenced at the hands of many within the federal government of Canada.
I'm Garth Karen, and I'm not anybody's trade secret. I was employed in the federal public service for many years, 20 years in my career, RCMP, CBSA, Employment and Social Development Canada, and others. In my career, I faced coercion and control, bullying, harassment, discrimination due to the fact that I was LGBTQ2S and Métis. I also faced this discrimination when employed in the aviation industry as well. I am a federal government LGBTQ purge survivor. NDAs and the damage they have caused contain many facets: the loss of employment, income, property, and self-esteem, including mental and physical health damage. The biggest damage to one person is that it covers up the destructive behavior of a harasser and how the employer and union may also cover it up. Attacks on one ethnicity and cultural background is equally alarming. Even if the department who covers it up does it via various pieces of legislation that is cooperatively worked on. I was told to take it as it is, sign the NDA or nothing, or sue us. I was not fairly compensated for the damage it has created. The federal government whistleblower protection was non-existent and not available for assistance due to time constraints and lack of knowledge. My harasser escaped any public exposure or punishment for which he might have appealed. His legacy still hangs over me some years later. This legislation will be at least put an end to much of the hidden clauses and words that have kept loopholes that the offender used day in and day out. This will free all of us, perhaps, but at least they won't be able to hide, and we can then speak out loudly. The ability for the government department not to use taxpayers' money is to attack the former employee or employees is very powerful. In that way, the chains will be off. I will be able to return being whole again, and we must join many states and countries throughout the world to end this is what I call my chattel of silence. Hopefully, there will be retroactive clauses in it to fit the Canadian Human Rights Act as well.
In June of 2011, after years already established on Parliament Hill, I was approached with 2 employment offers. Neither one I had applied for. One was with a newly elected member of Parliament, and the other with a minister I had already crossed paths with, in addition to her newly hired chief of staff, whom I worked with for almost a year in my then current job, and the reason why I was approached. I accepted the position with the minister as Director of Stakeholder Relations and Executive Assistant to the Minister. September of that year, I would be summoned to the office, disregarding my doctor's wishes and his medical notes, as I had already been out the week prior, feeling horribly unwell, though all of that was dismissed by the Chief of Staff, who continued to harass me at all hours of the day and night with work and even a job review. Just over 3 months of taking on this new position, I would be terminated for insubordination by the Chief of Staff. Ironically, that same morning, the minister in passing told me to focus on my health. The rug was torn out from under me. What truly changed the intensity of my healing, my self-worth, the level of my irreparable trauma, and my questioning trust, truth, and justice within the government and other agencies was what transpired after my termination while on medical leave. To remind, I was on the job for just over 3 months. I am now in year 14, and I have yet to be any closer to closing my file or speaking with someone who believes change is needed in these hallowed walls of Parliament Hill. It has been a continuous gut punch nightmare at the hands of government officials who have tried to beat me down, gone after my character, wait me out, gaslight, and in the end, silence my voice in a way that is beyond cruel and torturous. Painfully, I've told my story many times, surreal at best. I've been hypertensive since I started writing these video notes, my breath shallow, like elephants sitting on me, sweating under my armpits, getting lost in my thoughts, the foggy brain. Surprisingly, no tears rolling down my face this time. I'm exhausted, and the self-doubt is still there. Some days I'm numb. Other days I'm angered. Today, I'm hopeful for just one person who's privileged with the ability to change things, to open their door, say, "How can I help?" and be the change for us all. I was diagnosed with autoimmune hyperthyroid, known as Graves' disease, which affects the thyroid and wreaks havoc on your cardiovascular, metabolic, and neurological systems. My doctor said it was the most severe case he had seen in his 20 years of practice. In order to protect my rights, I lawyered with outside firms. The Chief of Staff and the Minister lawyered up with the Department of Justice. DOJ asked me to continue to work while I was terminated and while sick. I did not. DOJ sent the first error-filled severance package 7 months after I was terminated. The second came 14 months later with a non-disclosure agreement. I didn't sign. Me signing would have made all of their lies, cover-ups, and bad behavior go away, and my voice would be silenced forever. Other errors came in the form of DOJ paperwork within employment insurance, Canada Revenue, pension, and the list goes on, with huge consequences to me and my healing, health, and survival. All the while, I was using my voice to protect my rights, which came in the form of 1, a Canadian human rights complaint that was accepted, but 2 years later, the inquiry was no longer warranted, decided upon by the commissioner who was appointed by the Prime Minister, whose minister I was complaining about. 2, an Ontario civil claim that lost because it was not filed in the right jurisdiction, with DOJ awarded court costs that totaled, funny enough, approximately the same amount the monies the government owed me in severance. And 3, sharing my story with media outlet CBC in print, radio, and television. My voice was getting louder, and the bad actors needed me to stop. In 2016, I was contacted by Ottawa police because I now was being investigated for criminal harassment because the minister and the chief of staff feared for their lives, saying, among other things, that I jumped out of a bush while serving the minister court documents in February in the dead of winter during the early evening on her condo street in downtown Ottawa. I was not criminally charged, but I was investigated. 3/4 of my narrative never made it into the police file by the investigating officer shown by a Freedom of Information inquiry, but I do have a lifetime warning to not be in contact with them. To note, this fear of life was never mentioned by them in their narrative to the Canadian Human Rights Commission, the Ontario courts, or CBC, which all happened prior to their criminal complaint in 2016. When I finally did have the conversation with an Ottawa superintendent, he chalked up the minister's use of fear of life to her English not being her native tongue. Damage was done for me. I shrunk and lost my voice for a long time, scared to do anything with my file, even though I did nothing wrong. But now I'm back, louder than ever, and you should be too. We are all here for a reason, and that is ensuring that the Can't Buy Silence bill is passed. The work is done. All the reasons why you need to pass this legislation is shown. What more do you need? Each voice is a life. Remember their stories, share their stories, but let's end this cycle. No more. Never again, we say, right? Why should you vote yes? I ask, why wouldn't you vote yes?
I worked for Parks Canada in Jasper, Alberta from 2019 to 2020, a short stint due to winter seasonal work. The male coworker who lifted my shirt in the workplace disclosed to management in a collective meeting that he did it to see if I was wearing a belt. The misconduct ranges between 2 coworkers, and the third being my supervisor. Through an ATIP request, I was noted as an exemplary employee and perhaps one of the most improved young workers they'd come across in a long time. It was mentioned that my work ethic is hard to come by in a small mountain town, and I was advised they'd call me back next winter season. This was a dream job. Here's why I didn't sign an NDA. The first investigator sent an email to the Parks Canada representative policing and ultimately influencing the case that he was careful not to open the documentation I provided him, as it would lead him to in turn investigate Parks Canada for mishandling my complaints. The first formal third-party investigation finding of sexual harassment was retracted. For 3 years, it was humiliating to repeat my experiences through a total of 2 investigations, 2 grievance hearings, and 1 mediation. The third investigator, who was hired after the second one backed out, in the report with his findings, he stated that having my shirt lifted in the workplace could have also happened to a man. This suggests he lessened the severity of his findings. My case is unique because I was already credible on paper, yet my experience with Parks Canada's handling of my case was intensely dehumanizing, as if I had to prove the sexual harassment and assault repeatedly. When an NDA is knowingly put on the table, it's because the principle of what's happened is corrupt. NDAs protect only employers. Further, signing an NDA means to me that my employer owns my voice. If they own my voice, they own my future. I didn't realize the weight the thought of an NDA has until I experienced the possibility of it. No pretty settlement was going to change my reason for not signing an NDA. All I was seeking initially was for my job back, or a similar role, and a safe work environment. I never got to experience either of these with Parks Canada. Never again should any publicly funded employer have the room to police themselves and influence workplace misconduct investigations. It's taken me several years to love myself again. I blamed myself for even trying to do what was right for myself and for future workers. I could barely hold jobs after Parks Canada. I was easily triggered. My personal relationships have struggled. Imagine becoming a person you yourself despises. I moved out of Jasper because I'd see my harassers and the man who assaulted me working in the role I dreamed of. The extent to which Parks Canada twisted the truth ripped that dream from under me. Today, I remain terrified to stand up for what's right. Parks Canada public funding should otherwise be used to promote and conserve the delicate pieces of our country's heritage. Using public money to silence public servants is a disservice, and quite frankly, it's a disgrace to our nation. The public deserve transparency. Without stories like mine, where Parks Canada eventually agreed that my settlement not include an NDA, public funds will continue to be used to enhance our current corrupt system, as opposed to collaboratively repairing the system from a human aspect upwards. When government employers are not held to account by their workers, and further by the public, we stay where we are. We stay in the past, where workers give up their well-being for their employers. While I feel grateful that I'm able to share my story today as I see fit, I live my life carrying the unexplainable weight of the guilt I feel for achieving no NDA. I'm honored to have built a community that only we'll understand the deepest parts of, but it also leaves me concerned that some of those stories won't ever be heard, with opportunities like I have today to help in passing Bill S-232 to ban the use of NDAs in federal public service. I hope you'll agree that Canada's public service deserves better.
I am a long-serving Canada Border Services officer and a former canine handler. Everything changed for me when I reported harassment, bullying, and serious misconduct inside of the CBSA. Instead of addressing the wrongdoing, the agency worked to silence me. I was threatened, blamed, attacked, and treated as the problem, while those responsible were protected. Evidence was ignored, altered, and buried. And the goal was simple. The goal was and is to this day to silence me, but I have refused to disappear. When agencies use secrecy or NDAs, the harm is deep and lasting. Inside CBSA, NDAs are common. Employees, especially women, have been pressured to sign them just to escape or to salvage their careers or simply to move on. Once they sign, their voices vanish. Their stories disappear, the misconduct stays hidden, and the offenders continue on, protected. I am now facing that pressure myself. An NDA has been raised as a way to silence me and make me go away. But I will not sign away my voice or my story. And because of that refusal, retaliation has escalated to the highest levels of the agency. I have been outspoken and I have pushed for media exposure because I believe a day will come when the agency forces me into silence through an NDA. And before that happens, my story and the truth of what's going on must be heard. This fight has taken a toll on me emotionally, financially, and psychologically. NDAs don't protect victims. They protect institutions and the people who cause harm. Unfortunately, my case is not unique. Across CBSA and across Canada, employees are suffering in silence. I personally created a national support network, and the stories echo each other. Retaliation, coercion, and pressure to sign NDAs that erase victims and protect the agency. The core issue is this: there is no independent oversight within CBSA. Those accused of wrongdoing often control the processes meant to investigate them, and there is no safe place to speak and no accountability. NDAs make that silence deeper, and far too many have already paid the price. I know the day may come when I am pushed to walk away, but that day is not today. And that is why the Can't Buy My Silence Act matters so much. This bill would stop the misuse of NDAs in cases of harassment, discrimination, and misconduct. It would protect victims and ensure we can speak our stories. If this law had existed earlier, I would not be pressured to give away my story, and so many others would not have been erased. This bill gives victims a voice, a future, and a chance at accountability. My hope is that by speaking out, the voices of those silenced before me can finally be heard, and that Canada moves towards transparency, safety, and real oversight in our federal workplaces. This legislation gives victims back something they never should have lost, their voice. And until it passes, I will continue speaking for myself and for everyone who has been forced into silence.
I've been a journalist for most of my life. I worked for Canada's national public broadcaster for nearly 40 years on radio, TV, and digital platforms. I was always led by the same principles every responsible journalist follows: accountability, honesty, fairness, and transparency. I'm telling you this because when I brought forward allegations of discrimination and misconduct to CBC, I assumed the corporation was governed by the same ethics as I was. I can't go into detail about these allegations here. I can tell you that they're based in part on what was in my own medical file that was fed by individuals at CBC and maintained by CBC's insurer. I got that file in 2020, 5 years after I'd been removed from my job. And in those 5 years, I'd been plunged into crushing debt and a personal struggle that I can't even begin to describe. It was only after I revealed to CBC that I had the file that I was allowed to return to work. And then for the first time in my career, I filed a grievance. My union, the Canadian Media Guild, agreed I had been damaged and said I had an open and shut case. I was prepared to settle for less than I thought I was owed as a show of good faith. All I asked was that a fair settlement which accounted for the damage I suffered not be subject to any non-disclosure obligations, no NDAs. And that, it seems, was too much. I went through years of mediation, and CBC always refused to settle without some form of NDA. And so in 2023, I could no longer reconcile putting my name on a CBC story with what I was experiencing as an employee. I felt compelled to retire rather than pretend I had confidence in my employer to do the right thing. And although the Canadian Media Guild promised the case would go before an arbitrator, which would have resulted in a public decision, that didn't happen. Earlier this year, without my knowledge or consent, the Canadian Media Guild signed its own deal with CBC to end my grievance. And I cannot convey the astonishment and, frankly, anguish I felt when I learned the agreement the Guild signed contained an NDA prohibiting the union from even giving me a copy of the agreement. When I asked for one, I was told, file a complaint to the Canada Industrial Relations Board, the CIRB. And so I did. I went to the board seeking to overturn that agreement. CBC intervened to prevent the agreement from being included in the public record of my complaint. And I am grateful that the Canada Industrial Relations Board ruled that the document should be public. And it's my hope that the board's decision now makes that difficult, if not impossible, for employers to use NDAs as a shield against public scrutiny. This has been dragging on for over 10 years. It has done immeasurable damage to me, my family, my health, my savings, my reputation, and my dignity. But I refuse to walk away because if I don't speak out when it matters, what's the point of all that fairness and transparency dogma that I wore on my sleeve as a journalist? I believe that had it been illegal for CBC to impose an NDA when I brought forward my complaints, I wouldn't be doing this video. I wouldn't have retired. I believe without that legal hammer in its toolbox, CBC would have been compelled to address my complaints quickly and fairly and transparently. And that would have been better for me, and it would have been better for the CBC. The day that NDAs are illegal can't come soon enough.
And I worked at the Canada Border Services Agency from 2011 to 2024. I had a great career, but like many women there, I was treated differently to my co-workers once my pregnancies became known. My maternity leave was labeled as disruptive to their operations, and I was told elaborate lies to justify being singled out. I attempted to address the negative treatment I received. CBSA claimed to have many doors open for us to go to, but they all led to the same place. I felt like I didn't have a single safe place to be heard in a fair and impartial way. The public service should be setting an example. With an operating budget of over $2 million annually, the CBSA should not be telling me that I am a financial burden to them due to my pregnancy. If we expect the private sector to respect pregnant women and follow our laws, then the publicly funded CBSA needs to do the same. One of the reasons why I left the CBSA was because they refused to talk about what happened to me. They refused to address anything. It was impacting my mental health as I was begging to be heard. They made it clear that questioning management is bad. I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through. I refused to sign a non-disclosure agreement. It didn't feel right. Silencing people in this way serves no purpose other than to cover up wrongdoing. Non-disclosure agreements prevent productive discussions that can help correct the behavior of problematic individuals in leadership positions. If we aren't talking about it, we are working towards fixing the problem. Let's keep the conversations going to improve workplaces. The CBSA needs to increase accountability within management ranks. All I was asking for them was for them to follow the law. Silencing public servants who speak up when being treated unfairly is not okay. Let these conversations happen. End the use of NDAs. Voting for this bill tells Canadians you want a transparent government that is working to improve workplace conditions for employees. It means you want the CBSA to respect legislation like Bill 85. Please help us create psychologically safe workplaces.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for your legislation, and may it be sped through second reading.